Should we tell some ghost stories?
Yeah.
I thought this would be kind of fun.
Mm-hmm.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Disturbingly Interesting Podcast. It's a show where we talk about things that are strange, unusual, probably a little questionable, but always disturbing. My name is Megan. With me today is Ben. And tonight we're telling some ghost stories. For anyone who doesn't already know, Ben and I both have spooky storytelling podcasts, so I thought it might be fun for each of us to tell ghost stories that we've written. Here's where this all went downhill for me. So while I was doing this, I kind of just kept having these questions, and I'm like, where did ghost stories come from? Like, why do we love ghost stories? Right? Like, where did they come from? Why do we love them? Why do we believe in them? So as par for the course for me, I tried to answer a few simple questions and then ended up doing this deep dive. So I have a little bit of a history lesson for us on ghost stories, which I have no idea if anybody else is going to appreciate. And I guess if it sucks, we'll just take it out.
No, this will be good. I think this is important for people to understand the role ghost stories fit in society, because I think a lot of people don't understand it.
I would agree.
Yeah.
And I think people don't understand how important storytelling is in general. I mean, it is the earliest form of communication that we've ever had. So it makes sense that ghost stories have been around for a while. So what is a ghost story? Ghost story, it's more than just a scary tale, because at its core, right, it's a story told by the living to keep the dead in the present, right? Not necessarily their physical self, but their soul or their spirit as a ghost. And sometimes that ghost is visual, right? Like the figure we see in the hallway or at the foot of the bed. And sometimes you can only hear it, right? Or like footsteps or voices or knocks. Sometimes your ghost is symbolic, right? So it's the story suggests that they're not fully gone. So maybe that place that they had influence still has that vibe of them hanging around. Ghost stories, they've appeared in cultures all over the world for thousands of years. They show up in oral traditions, religious texts, folklore, literature, and local legends. In other words, it's not a modern invention. It's one of humanity's oldest ways of thinking about death. Which makes sense, because death is one of the oldest mysteries we as human beings have ever faced. When someone dies, the living are left with some unanswered questions, right? Where do they go? Are they still aware of us? Can they hear us? Can they return? All these questions that we've had for thousands of years. And if we go back far enough, we can find that ghost stories are woven throughout early literature and religion. Like in the ancient Greek world, the dead were not always imagined as completely gone. For example, in the Odyssey, Odysseus travels to the underworld and speaks with the spirits of the dead. The Romans had similar ideas. A famous example comes from Pliny the Younger, who told a story about a haunted house in Athens. And in that account, a ghost appears repeatedly and is eventually linked to an unsettled burial. Early ghost stories are not just about fear and trying to be scary. This is the part I like. They're used as teaching mechanisms. If the dead were not properly buried, remembered, or honored, they could get upset and stick around and let you know about it. So a ghost might appear because burial rites or rituals were not completed correctly, or because a wrong had been committed, or even because the dead needed prayers or offerings or remembrances in order to move on from this world to the next. And if you messed that up, that's how you get a haunting. You mess it up.
Yep.
But that's part of why ghost stories are so enduring and why we love them, right? They scratch that itch of wondery. And they gave people an idea of what might happen after death. And they're not just for entertainment, because they are stories, they're deeply connected to what it means to be human. They're a way of organizing grief, morality, and the unknown of what happens to us after we die. That being said, when we talk about modern ghost stories and modern stuff, clearly they have taken on an entertainment role. But they were not originally for entertainment. So why do we believe in it? Why do we even believe in ghosts?
I don't know.
It's not just one thing. Ben, it's several things.
Okay.
There's several reasons why we do. First, human beings were pattern-seeking creatures. Our brains are built to notice connections, especially when we're not sure of what's happening. If we hear a sound in the dark or see movement out of the corner of our eye or experience something strange, our minds immediately try to make sense of it. And that can be very useful if you're trying to survive. But it could lead to us possibly jumping to some conclusions when it comes to determining if something is supernatural or not. Second, expectation matters. If someone enters a building already believing that it's haunted, then every noise, cold spot, or shadow becomes more significant, and that context will shape their experience whilst they're in there. Third, our memories are not perfect, right? People remember really emotionally powerful experiences over the ordinary ones. So in the event that something was very scary or eerie feeling that was strong enough for people to remember that part of the experience as opposed to anything else. And fourth, a lot of people are influenced by confirmation bias, meaning that we're more likely to notice the evidence that supports what we already believe, even if there's evidence to challenge that. And that goes both ways, for people who believe and for people who don't believe. And in addition to those, there's the emotional aspect to it as well. If you're grieving the loss of a loved one, the idea that that person might still be present or might still be around, even in a small or symbolic way, can be very meaningful to people. So today, ghost stories, they're everywhere. Books, movies, television, social media, and podcasts. Anyone can be a ghost hunter now. On screen, the barrier to entry is very low. If you have an iPhone or any phone and the access to the internet, you are now a ghost hunter. There you go. Yeah. Or if you get your tools, you are a ghost hunter. But instead of ancient tombs or village burial grounds, modern ghost stories are often unfolding in places like hotels or schools or hospitals or highways or old houses. But really the themes are all the same. It's unresolved death, unfinished business, fear, memory, or uncertainty. Modern paranormal media creators and influencers have helped standardize and shape the language of hauntings. So things like cold spots, disembodied voices, shadow figures, residual energy, and intelligent spirits. This is one of the reasons why ghost stories remain so popular, because they evolve with us as humans, and they stick around. And because they're so flexible, they're never really ever going to go away. There's like brief history. It was much longer. I was reading through it and I'm like, I can't do this to people. I have to take some of this out. It's way too long.
Yeah.
But I do think it is interesting, and I agree with you. I think it's important for people to know that while we do mainly use them for entertainment today, they did play a very significant role in our history.
Yeah.
I do have some fun ghost story facts, just two of them. The first ghost story ever recorded, which happens to be one of my favorites, and we mentioned it a little bit earlier, is that ghost story from Pliny the Younger, a Roman politician. Are you familiar with this one?
No.
It's a good one. So Pliny the Younger, he was a Roman politician and he was a writer, and he wrote a letter. So this is not a ghost story that happened to him. It's a ghost story that he heard about, and then he wrote it in a letter, which was then later discovered. It's about a haunted house in Athens. So a Stoic philosopher named Athenodorus, I'm not going to try to pronounce his last name because I can't, but he was visiting Athens and he came across this house that was for sale. It was a beautiful home for sale, and it was dirt cheap. And he's like, I don't get it. Why is this house so cheap? So he asked around and heard from the locals that some pretty creepy shit goes on there. And he was like, say no more. I'll take it today. Slaps his money on the table. So the first night he sat at his desk, turned on his oil lamp, and began writing his Stoic philosophy. And as he's writing, he hears chains rattling in the hallway, and they're getting closer. He is not going to look up, though. He knows there's a ghost, but he's busy. He could not be bothered to stop his writing. And he doesn't look up until the sound of the chains rattling are so close, they feel like they're right next to him. So he finally looks up and sees a ghost. The ghost is staring down at him and begins to raise his finger like he's going to direct Athenodorus to follow him. But the ever-practicing Stoic says, no, I'm not done writing, and goes back to writing and ignores the ghost standing right next to him. So once he was finished writing, he's done, and he says, okay, I'll go with you. So he proceeds to follow the ghost into the backyard, where it disappears about halfway through the backyard. So Athenodorus, he marks the spot where he saw the ghost disappear, and the next morning he calls the local authorities, and they start digging. And wouldn't you know it, they find the remains of a man who had been murdered and hastily buried in the backyard.
Interesting.
I love this story. I love the fact that he knew it was haunted.
Yeah.
And was like, yes, this is what I want. 100% this is what I want.
Right.
And then when the ghost was there, he's like, I'm not done. I'm not done writing. You need to wait.
Take a second.
Yeah. But that's one of I have to say, I've always really liked that story. The next fun fact is the first ever documented American ghost story. So the first ghost story that was recorded and documented in America is that of Nellie Butler. In the late 18th century in Maine, a young woman named Nellie Butler died during childbirth, but her story didn't end there.
Nope.
According to local accounts, her ghost appeared not only to people she knew, to her family, but to the entire town that she lived in before she died. People claimed to hear her spirit knocking, speaking, and even urging a marriage that later took place between her surviving husband and another random woman in town. The sightings spread throughout the community and turned Nellie Butler into America's earliest and best known ghost story. One of the coolest parts about this is that her spirit and all of the events, and this took place over years, all of these events were witnessed by hundreds of people who all gave sworn testimony as to what they had seen and experienced. So there's America's very first ghost story.
That sounds really familiar. I feel like I've heard that one before.
And you might have. It's like pretty, I don't want to say popular. I don't think it's a popular story, but I think it's a very unique one.
Yeah.
So there's our first documented American ghost story and the first ever, well, not the first ever, we can assume is one of the first ever documented ghost stories.
The earliest surviving documented ghost story.
Awesome. That's what I have for that. Should we get into telling some ghost stories now?
Yeah, I'm always down for that.
All right, perfect. You go first.
Okay.
So now, is this a true ghost story or is this one that you've written?
This is one that was sent in to my show, and I turned it into a more first-person narrative. So it is based on an encounter that was sent in. The story was sent in by a man named Greg from Mattoon, Illinois. I'm going to read it in Greg's first person, as I do on my show. If you're from Mattoon, you're up with two kinds of local history. There's the kind on plaques, railroads, and old brick storefronts. You know, the kind of normal Midwestern stuff. A haunted cornfield, a haunted hay bale. But then there's the other kinds of stories that your grandpa mentions when the power goes out, or someone tells around a campfire. In Mattoon, that story is that of the Mad Gasser. Back in 1944, people here started waking up in the middle of the night smelling something strangely sweet, almost sickening. Some said it was like cheap perfume. Some said flowers. But others always said it smelled like gas. And you would be hit with these strange symptoms of nausea, a burning throat, weak legs, and in one case, paralysis. People always saw a shadow in the windows, a tall man in dark clothes, wearing a gas mask, just steps outside your front door or outside your window. His signature, on top of the gas, was leaving a damp cloth on your door handle. The papers at the time called him an anesthetic prowler, and pretty soon, armed men were patrolling the streets every night, looking for somebody that they would never catch. The reports clustered fast, especially after the papers started printing them. Then everybody had an encounter with the Mad Gasser of Mattoon, Illinois. But there's one thing about legends. Many times they survive. And in 2017, I found out that the Mad Gasser of Mattoon had survived just fine. I was 28 then, living in a little rental in the older part of town. I won't give the exact address because there's about 5 people who live in town, and everyone will know that it was me. I had gotten interested in the Gasser because a local history article popped up on Facebook. I knew the basics growing up here, same as everybody, but I'd never sat down and read a lot of those old accounts, a lot of those old newspaper articles. And doing so now was my mistake. I started reading these articles, and my view of Mattoon started looking different. When I would drive past the North 21st Street, I would think of Bella Cord's finding that damp cloth on her doorstep. I would pass Marshall Avenue, and I would remember the story of Eileen Kearney saying her legs didn't work anymore after smelling a perfume come in through her window. And then I would see the alleyway behind Eileen's house, thinking about the gunfire between the Mad Gasser and the police at the time. Though the police ended up shooting at a phantom, the Gasser wasn't there. The week after seeing that story, I became obsessed. I read everything, traveling around town, reading all those old headlines, seeing where all of these things took place. The victim lists, all of the theories, and then the official explanation. But one night, and this is what is particularly important, all of the Mad Gasser experiences happened over a 2-week period in mid-September. The time period of which I started getting interested in this happened to be mid-September. I'd just gotten home from work at 11:30 p.m. I wasn't drunk after a couple beers, but I was a little tipsy. Was just going to lay on the couch, watch some TV, and pass out. You know, like I did most nights. But at 1 a.m, I woke up. I didn't usually wake up from my drunken slumbers, but it was like my body had noticed something. I didn't know if I drank too much and needed to yak or what, but I felt nauseous and there was this smell. A sweet, unnatural smell. Almost like perfume. It was sharp, almost zippy. And I don't know why, but my brain went immediately to 1944. Well, Greg, I think we know why your brain went there. I sat up quite fast and surveyed the room around me. I felt my legs. They were heavier, but they still seemed to work. I slapped myself across the face and said, you know, Greg, you gotta just snap out of this. You just read too many of those stories. But the smell was there. It wasn't my imagination. It was in the room with me. I decided to stand up and walk around. My knees were a little weak, so I had to brace myself on the side of the couch, stumbling to the front window where I opened a slat in the blinds, looking through to my front porch. Standing there was a tall man in dark clothes, wearing a gas mask. All of the reports now flooded back into my brain, everything I had read. No, this isn't real, this has to be a dream, I whispered to myself. But no matter how many times I blinked, looked away, and looked back outside, the man was still there. And now, he was moving. Not fast, not really even deliberately, just slowly towards the door. Almost like he heard me inside and needed to finish up whatever it was he was trying to do. I backed away from the window and grabbed my phone. Called 911 immediately. The dispatcher answered after just 2 rings. Hello? Hi, I can smell chemicals inside my house, and I think there's someone outside. The dispatcher asked me if I was able to leave the house, or if the person outside was a threat. I don't know, okay? Can you just send somebody here? This was all true because I didn't know what was happening. I didn't know if I was dreaming this, or if one of my friends was messing with me because I maybe mentioned in an offhand comment that I was reading about the Mad Gasser. I picked up a mug after I put my phone down. It was the closest thing I could find. I thought maybe a knife would be better, but all I had was a little mug of coffee I sat next to my couch, or a little mug of water I sat next to my couch. I hadn't thought I needed to defend myself tonight. I slowly started making my way to the kitchen to grab a knife, and that's when the smell started getting stronger. I started getting hints of sweet but rottenness at the same time. I rounded the corner into my kitchen, trying to find the knife. Trying to be slow, trying to be quiet. When bang, someone at the front door started knocking. I almost dropped the mug, even though I knew it wouldn't be any good in a fight. I made my way to grab a knife now. Bang, bang, bang. More knocks came from the front door. At this point, I crouched into the fetal position. Fight, flight, freeze. I chose freeze. I could hear the sirens now, not close, but close enough. Like I said, Mattoon's not big. It wouldn't take the police long to get here. I don't know what the person at that front door did, but I heard footsteps getting further away from my house. The police got there maybe 45 seconds later. They searched the yard. They searched my house. There were no footprints. There was no person. There was no vehicle. The officer did, however, mention a weird cloth sitting on the ground outside my front door. The fire department came too. They checked for gas, carbon monoxide, nothing. They told me to air the house out regardless, and then just asked me some questions. And the more I answered them, the more embarrassed I became. The more I talked, the more I could see the story forming in all of their brains. Guy reads about local legend. Guy wakes up drunk smelling something weird. Guy scares himself. Maybe that's all it was. Maybe that's just the rational version I keep telling myself. Hell, I've repeated it plenty of times. But there's one detail to this story I've never told anyone, because it's the detail of the story that makes it impossible for me to rationalize. The next morning, I went outside, decided to look around my house to see if the police or the fire department had missed anything. And I think they did. It wasn't a footprint and wasn't another piece of cloth. It was something carved into the wood post on my front porch. MGM. For what I assume was the Mad Gasser of Mattoon. I took a new job a few years later and moved out of the house and haven't been back to Mattoon since. And I know what the historians and people of Mattoon are going to say, that the 1944 case was probably more a mix of humor, panic, wartime nerves, and someone being mischievous. I believe it mostly. But that night in Mattoon, I swear I could still smell the pockets of that weird, unnaturally sweet scent. And maybe the Mad Gasser is still there. That is Greg's story.
Damn. That's good.
Yeah.
That was a good one. You read that very well.
Thank you. No, it's I've never done like a full dry run on a read. Like I'm always used to being able to like go back and like fix up like my stutters and like misreads.
I'm not gonna lie to you. In addition to having to narrate a story in front of you, also the same thing.
Yeah.
Like I've I'm used to having editing as a backup.
Yeah, no, that was
being able to have a double take.
That was fun. No, I thought this was a fun story. I really love those like urban legend type stories where there is something real that leads into the encounters, and then it's just I feel like it puts you in that weird kind of Twilight Zone-y space where like what is actually happening. And I love the fact where he's like, I'm gonna be honest, I was really fucked up when this happened. Like that was the first line of this email he sent me. He's like, I was a really like I would preempt this. I was really drunk.
Just so you're aware.
Yeah, and I was like, that's fine. Yeah, that's fine.
It happens to the best of us.
Yeah.
I agree. I love stories that have just that kernel of truth to them. Could this happen? Could this not happen?
Yeah.
So this story is called Lonely Lake.
Okay.
And it is based off of a not well-known little urban legend in northern Minnesota. Okay. Gotta brace myself. My dad told me he loved me exactly one time growing up. I was 13 and had fixed his computer after he somehow installed enough toolbars and pop-ups to make the damn thing unusable. He stared at the monitor for a minute, nodded once, and said, well, I guess you're good for something. That was about as emotional as he got. My dad wasn't mean. He just belonged to a different world than I did. He liked working on cars and building stuff. He hunted, fished, split wood for fun, and thought owning more than one pair of boots was unnecessary. I grew up in the 80s and 90s. I loved technology, computers, video games, everything. I wanted to know how it all worked. Dad used to say, "I don't know why you like all that robot shit." Not angrily, but he was just always confused and frustrated when he had to deal with it. We tried. He came to my robotics competition once. I went hunting with him once. We both suffered through each other's hobbies because that's what you do, right? And then I grew up, and life happened. College, marriage, kids, work. Before I knew it, I was in my mid-30s living near Minneapolis, working in software engineering, and only seeing my parents on the holidays. Dad was in his 50s. He was still healthy, and he spent every weekend outdoors. But one day I had this weird feeling. It wasn't anything dramatic, just this realization that eventually there'd be a last fishing trip, a last conversation. And I didn't even really know the guy. So I worked up the nerve to call him and tell him we should spend more time together. Shockingly, he didn't hesitate. He said right away that him, Jack, and Eddie, his two besties, were planning a weekend ice fishing trip in February at a brand new spot. Then after a pause, he said, "Are you coming?" I said yes immediately, and then spent the next 4 months secretly watching YouTube videos on things like ice fishing basics for beginners. Dad didn't need to know I had never done this before. We left Friday morning, loaded up his truck, and headed north with Eddie following in his truck. We were going way up north. I really do love it here. Once you leave the city, rural Minnesota eventually turns into something else entirely. The farms disappear, the trees get thicker, and the roads get quieter. Dad said the lake we were going to was some kind of hidden gem. It was small and in the middle of nowhere up by the Canadian border. Some guy they knew at Bass Pro Shop had told Jack about it while they were buying lures. Hardly anybody knew about it, he said. Great fishing. Dad said the place was called Lonely Lake, which made me laugh. Not exactly the best marketing plan, I thought, but okay. From the passenger seat, Jack said he thought the guy told him that they couldn't stay overnight. Dad snorted. He said they're just trying to keep all the good fishing to himself. Nobody really said anything after that. But I remember Jack looking like he wasn't smiling anymore. We got there late Friday afternoon. The snow-covered path, because I refused to call it a road, just ended abruptly. And there was literally nothing. There was no campground, no cabins, no signs. Just trees opening up into a frozen lake. The place looked untouched, and the forest surrounding it was dense and dark enough that even during the daylight it felt shaded. There were also no other vehicles or people, not even snowmobile tracks. This place really was a hidden gem. We parked out on the ice, unloaded the trucks, and set up the ice houses about 20 feet apart from each other. Dad and I were in one, and Jack and Eddie in the other. The whole process took maybe about an hour, but the whole time I had this strange feeling, like the woods were crowded, even though there was clearly no one else there. The feeling that if I looked long enough between the trees, I'd notice something, like I was expecting someone or something to be there. But I just ignored it. That night started out great. Dad and I fished, and we talked, like really talked, about work, marriage, kids, his dad, stuff we'd never talked about before. At one point, he looked over at me and said, "You seem happy." It was short and simple, but that might have been the nicest thing he'd ever said to me. Around 11, we shut the lights off and went to sleep. I was in the lower bunk and Dad was above me. At around 1 in the morning, I woke up. At first, I thought someone had left the radio on. It sounded like people talking. Multiple people, outside. I sat up and tried to listen to the conversation. At least, it sounded like a conversation, but it wasn't close enough to understand. Then I realized something weird. Nobody was interrupting each other. They were all speaking continuously. Like 20 conversations happening at once, all layered on top of each other. And then I heard my dad right outside. He said, "Are you coming?" I already assumed Dad, Jack, and Eddie were outside, and they must have just realized that I was now awake. As I started to stand to get dressed and go outside, I froze. Dad's boots were still by the door. I turned my head and looked up at his bunk. He was fast asleep. I panicked and woke him up. His eyes opened up immediately, and I put my finger to my lips to shush him and tell him to be quiet, listen. It took him a second, but then he heard it. His face changed. He wasn't scared, but he was annoyed. He whispered, "Who the hell is out there? They're going to scare all the damn fish away." The voices continued. It was constant, like people arguing, but impossible to understand. It wasn't even English, or any language I had ever heard before. Dad got dressed and stood by the door listening, his hand on the doorknob, but he never opened it. And that's what bothered me the most. Dad always checked everything. Flat tire? Check. Random squeaking noise in the house? Check. Possible monsters under my bed or in the closet? Check. But that night, he never opened the door. And eventually he just said to go back to sleep. We didn't, though. We just laid there silent in our bunks listening. Once morning came, we opened the door. There was fresh snow on the ground, but nothing else. No footprints, no tire tracks, ski tracks, nothing. Just our footprints and tracks from unloading. Jack said he slept through everything. And Eddie said he did hear something, but he thought it was probably the wind. Dad didn't really say much. He just stared at the tree line like he was looking for whoever it was. We all just decided to ignore it, move on and catch some fish and relax. But the whole day just felt wrong. Every time I stepped outside, I felt watched. It was a very creepy feeling. We kept thinking we were seeing movement in the woods, but there was nothing there. And in the evening, the voices came back. This time earlier, and they sounded much closer, like they were all around us. Dad stood up and yelled, "Hey!" And they stopped for just a second, but then immediately started up again, like nothing had happened. At this point, Jack and Eddie were definitely hearing them too. We were all pretty freaked out and just stayed inside our ice houses. Once it really got dark out, we started hearing footsteps in the snow. Crunch, crunch, crunch. It sounded like slow circles around the ice houses. And it went on for hours, until Dad finally snapped. He pulled on his boots and grabbed his flashlight, flung the door open. Instant silence. He was just staring out into the darkness with his little flashlight. And then from the forest, we heard someone laugh. It was clear as day. That was a person laughing. Dad shut the door immediately and locked it. I asked him what he saw, and he didn't answer. He just stared at the wall, so I asked him again. Finally, he said really quietly that there weren't any footprints outside the ice house, or around the area, or anywhere that he could see. That was the first time I ever saw my dad scared. And I don't know how, but somehow we managed to fall asleep, or pass out from exhaustion. And around 3 a.m. I woke up. I sat up and listened for the voices, but they were gone. I almost thought for a minute that the whole thing was over, until I heard the footsteps. Just one person. It sounded like just one person slowly walking up to the ice house. My heart started to race the closer they got to the wall, the one that was just on the other side of my bunk. They stopped what sounded like inches away. And then I heard a voice. Not just any voice. My dad's voice. And it said, "Are you coming?" Dad was asleep, I know he was. But this sounded exactly like him. I almost pissed myself, I was so scared. The next morning, as soon as the sun was up, we were all out of there. We looked around as we packed up, but of course, there were no other tracks. No indication that anyone had been there besides us. We packed in silence. Nobody wanted breakfast. Nobody wanted one last hour of fishing. We all just wanted to get the hell out of there. A week later, I was still thinking about what happened, so I got curious. I wanted to find the lake, so I Googled Lonely Lake MN. but nothing showed up in the search results. I tried just looking for it on Google Maps. I mean, I had a pretty rough idea of where it was, but where I looked, there was nothing, just forest. I called Dad and I asked him if he remembered the exact location where it was, but he said he didn't remember, and even if he did, he'd want to forget it. I dropped it after that. We all seemed to have this unspoken agreement that we weren't going to bring it up, and we weren't going to tell anyone. Dad passed away a few years ago of a heart attack. It was a really awful time. It hurt so much more than I thought it would. The only reason I'm telling this story is because I had a dream about it last night. In my dream, I was sitting alone in my dad's ice house. Just me, staring at the hole in the ice. Just me, staring at a hole in the ice. And Dad's boots by the door. When out of nowhere, there was a loud knock. And then a voice. Not just any voice. My dad's voice. And it said, "Are you coming?"
Respectfully. Fuck that. That was really good.
What was super funny was I was actually at a lake in Minnesota when I wrote this.
Nice. Yeah, that was good. Ugh. For starters, I'm not getting on a frozen lake.
No, hell no.
Yeah.
I don't know that there's any part of ice fishing that sounds like fun to me.
No.
But in all fairness, I've never done it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I read a story. It was on a Facebook post from a page, like a weird stories page or something like that. Mm-hmm. And it was talking about a lake in Minnesota where people claim they hear singing coming from the ice.
That was a good.
That was fun.
Yeah.
I thought that would not be as fun as it was. I was like, oh man, why did I say we should do this?
No,
I'm gonna screw it up.
You did a really good job.
Same. You nailed it.
I had to mute my microphone because I was afraid I was gonna like audibly react.
I did think about it a couple times while you were telling your story. I was like, oh, okay. Hopefully it doesn't come through. I think with Riverside, I can mute my mute my track at that point. But no, that was good. I've heard the Mad Gasser of Mattoon urban legend story. So it's cool to hear. Yeah, again, somebody's interpretation of if that potentially were to have happened to him if he remembered somewhat from his drunken stupor.
Yeah, I feel like that would be a fun urban legend. Like if you just lived there, just randomly fuck with people, put on a gas mask, and just walk around at night.
Every Halloween, I would be the Mad Gasser of Mattoon.
Yeah, I would just run around farting on people.
Yep, that's it. The Mad Gasser of Mattoon. Yeah. So that's the show. Thank you guys for listening. Hope to see you next week for another disturbingly interesting episode.
Toodles.
Peace. Toodles.